What is up, Dong Army? It's your boy Royce. This video is going to be a really quick one on gap years, and I wanted to make this video because, that is one of the most commonly asked questions I get from people, which is, should I take a gap year? That, along with other typical questions like, can you write my entire personal statement for me? And what are you doing in my house? How did you get in? Of course, this is just advice. Don't take this to heart. Make sure you consult your pre-med advisors, friends, your family, things like that, because it is, both a professional decision and a personal one too. For example, you might have circumstances where you have to just take a year out, for family issues. And there's nothing you can do about that. You have to attend to your family, probably. You got to decide what's more important, medicine or your family. And it's better that you make a decision as soon as possible, which is what I've done. And I've decided medicine. So I haven't responded to my mom's texts in a few weeks. So the first thing I want to cover is my journey. So as you may know, I am a third year MD PhD student at UPenn. I did my undergrad at WashU. For me, I did not take a gap year and I applied straight through. So what that means is I applied right after my junior year in the summer in June. And throughout senior year, I did all of my medical school secondaries, interviews. So for me, I was, grappling with this question is, should I take a gap year? How do you know that you're ready? To answer this, you should ask yourself a few questions related to your application. It really boils down to checking a few boxes, whether I have, 1 to 300 hours of clinical volunteering, whether I have, maybe like 50 hours or 100 hours or so of shadowing, whether I have, 50 or 100 or more hours of research, depending on if you're applying, MD or MD PhD. Is my GPA high enough for the schools that I'm interested in? If you have taken the MCAT and are satisfied with your score. In my opinion, you can cram in a lot in your final semester before you apply. So actually in my spring semester of junior year, I, checked a bunch of those boxes. I got like 50 hours of shadowing, which I didn't really have before. I did like 50 or 100 more hours of clinical volunteering. I took the MCAT during that semester too. So I would say that if you're a few months out and you're ambivalent, if you're on the fence, you're more ready than you think. You just gotta fulfill if it's 50 more hours of shadowing, you can totally do that in your spring semester. So all the things I talked about so far mostly apply to MD applicants. Now when it comes to MD PhD applicants, really the biggest thing you have to focus on, obviously, is your research. So I would say that when it comes time to apply, the end of your junior year, if your research is ready, then just apply. I would highly suggest you don't take a gap year just to get more papers. You should, have demonstrated your ability to be an independent, critical, a self-sufficient researcher. You have demonstrated this already up until this point, and you're able to articulate this in your MD PhD essays. That, they were able to take ownership of their own project, that they were able to, create the data on their own, collect the data, analyze the data all on their own, think of next steps on their own. You don't need a publication to demonstrate this. You can just write about it in your MD PhD essay. It's totally fine. Just don't lie. I know plenty of people who've gone to very good MD PhD programs without a single publication, and they ended up fine. I think admissions committees understand that there is an incredible amount of luck, of serendipity that goes into publications. That these admissions committees will not hold it against you. And that's why I would say that if you're applying MD PhD or even MD, do not do gap years just for the sake of getting more publications. Try to, gun for the Ivy League medical schools. I think that's a very bad idea. You should totally reconsider. Obviously, many people do not have these intentions when it comes to gap years. Some people just want to take gap years to take a break. And from that perspective, I think that's a perfectly valid thing to do, to be honest with you, because the medical training process is extremely long, extremely difficult, extremely depressing in a lot of ways. And so, taking that time off might be really nice. But just make sure that, you're doing something productive, your application is really benefited by it. You might have a really good application after your junior year, but if you take another gap year and you don't really add on anything else, that could potentially hurt you, because medical schools are expecting that same, vector that you're moving along, that same trajectory. And if all of a sudden you're just dropping off and, not doing anything productive, if you're not doing lab research, if you're not doing like a master's, that could hurt your application. So just keep that in mind. So when it comes to the costs of a gap year, these are the reasons why I personally did not do a gap year. So first of all, it's the opportunity cost. The training path is already so long, especially for MD PhD, but even for MD, it's super long. MD is 4 years plus residency, which is like 4 or 5 or 6 years or whatever, before you start, practicing and before you start making money. Because if you think about it, your gap year is not just costing you whatever it's costing you at the time, but it's also the opportunity cost of missing out on a future physician's salary for an entire year. And honestly, you're spending an extra year of your life in the medical training if you think about it. Instead of a 4-year undergrad, you're doing like a 5-year undergrad before you start medical school. I just also think from that perspective, it's not worth it. Now, I will say that this video so far has just been me, bashing gap years. But again, I'll say that obviously there are circumstances when gap years are necessary. For example, your GPA is too low, or your MCAT is too low, or you haven't taken it yet, or you truly just don't have enough hours for clinical volunteering, non-clinical volunteering, research, shadowing, etc., that you really cannot catch up on by the time applications roll around. Or if you have like a career pivot, you might have been working in like investment banking for like 2 years, and you might decide that the 60 to 70 hour work weeks are not worth it, and you want to instead do 60 to 70 hours of medicine. These are completely necessary and legit reasons for having to do a post-bac. You have to take orgo, you can't avoid that, or you have to raise your GPA in order to get a medical school. So the next thing I'll talk about is if you actually take a gap year, you should definitely fill it in with something productive. And that's because medical schools are definitely going to ask you during your secondaries, during your interviews, what did you do during your gap year? What are your plans for your gap year? And it is very tempting to just want to travel the world during that time and truly take a break, but unfortunately that is not the best idea, because med schools will ask about it. Obviously, what you do during the gap year depends on what your application needs. So if you need more clinical hours, you can become an EMT or a scribe, for example. If you're trying to get more productive research hours, you could just be in a research lab, which is totally valid. I've seen a lot of people do this before. And like I said before, you can also do a post-bac program. So that's gonna do it for this video. Hope you guys found it informative, entertaining, and I'll see you guys next week.